Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on Sea of Stars. This is one of the most anticipated indie RPGs I've seen in years. I've had so many people coming to me asking me if I was going to play it, and now that it's out, people have asked me if I've played it, and the answer is yes. I've 100%ed the game. That took me about 40 hours to do, and I'm ready to share my experiences with the game. I'll be keeping it spoiler-free, and I'll be sticking to footage that's from early on in the game, so you don't need to worry about that. At its core, Sea of Stars is looking to replicate that classic turn-based RPG look and feel, especially from the Super Nintendo era, which it draws a lot of inspiration from. Seriously, you can't miss it if you've played games from that era. In fact, I'm going to be calling some of them by name in this video. And you know what? It captures that look and feel very, very well. There's a lot of vibrant and varied areas that you'll go to. There's classic RPG style puzzle solving, which isn't too tough, but there's usually one or two that racks your brain a little bit. The enemy sprites and boss animations in particular are really, really well done and feel like something that would release in the modern day. Animations on every little thing that they do, even the way they react to your attacks, is animated in there. Not to mention the characters themselves look great and feel great to play. Now, it's not just in the turn-based RPG aspects or the puzzle solving or the areas where they're trying to get that retro feel, but also from the soundtrack. Now, the majority of the songs are composed by Eric W. Brown, and he does a fantastic job. However, 10 of the tracks from the game are actually composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, who is most notable for composing Chrono Trigger. Like I said, you're not going to be able to avoid these Super Nintendo references when you have Chrono Trigger's composer guest composing on your soundtrack. And Mitsuda's tracks are fantastic. They really add an extra element and stand out as his specific style and really go to propel that Chrono Trigger-like feel that the game is already going for. Then, of course, there's the story, which, like I said, I won't spoil, but I was glad to see that it was easy to follow. I understood everything as it was happening, but that didn't mean I didn't have questions while it was happening, too. And they did manage to actually surprise me with a few of the twists, even if some of them I probably should have seen coming. There's lovable and memorable characters across the board, whether they be characters you just spend a few minutes with on occasion, or characters that you're spending the entire game with. They did a really, really good job, especially with one character in particular, one of the earliest characters in the game, Garl. I'm not going to tell you anything else, but if you finish this game and you don't love Garl, I don't know what to say about you. Now on to the combat. Like I said, they're going for turn-based, but it's not as simple as that. Really, it seems like they looked at all the most major components of the genre's most popular games and put them all together with a few small twists. First of all, it's pure turn-based. It's not any sort of ATB system, so you can take your time on your turn to make whatever decision you're going to make. It has Chrono Trigger style mechanics where some attacks are position driven, so you might want to move enemies to a new spot in order to make sure they line up for something. And there's even team combos, some of which are very, very cheeky references to Chrono Trigger's actual team attacks. A really, really obvious one is Super Mario RPG style timed hits and guards, and they are really on everything in this game. It's sometimes a little difficult to pick out where the animation is for that perfect guard or that perfect hit, but when you get it, it really helps a lot with a lot of the encounters. There's even derivatives on the Bravely Default / Octopath style boost system, where by landing basic attacks on enemies, you drop these boost orbs around the arena. Then you can choose to use them to add elements to your basic attacks or empower your other attacks further to deal more damage. And that is then combined with the weakness-driven interrupt mechanics, where if you hit all of the weaknesses while an enemy is charging an attack, you'll just outright interrupt it. So making sure to use a combination of your boost systems and your skills is really how you're going to work against that, and it gives every individual battle its own flavor instead of feeling like you just have to do the same thing, like, oh, I just go here, press this, and that's how I wipe out everything that isn't a boss. It was very refreshing, and it helps that most of the enemies are actually fairly difficult throughout the game, unless, of course, you start digging into some of the things that make the game a little easier. On top of that, this game tackles one of the biggest problems that I tend to have in a lot of RPGs. You can freely swap party members in combat, and everybody levels completely in uniform. There's no individual character EXP. There's just the overall party EXP, and every time you gain a level, everybody gains a level. I always feel so conflicted when I can only bring 3 people and there's 6 or 7 people in a lineup, and I just don't know what to do because I want to try something new, but what I have is already working so well for me. Do I play the whole game again and try that? I don't know if I really have the time for that. No, here, it's fully designed around the idea that you can freely swap around. You'll probably still stick to a few characters that you really like, and I think there are a few characters that stand out as stronger than others, but the fact that I have this option led me to actually go out of my way to try to come up with different strategies, and that was very welcome. Leveling also allows you to select bonuses, again, a la Super Mario RPG, so you can better upgrade your characters to do things that you want them to do. I personally found that upgrading mana and their attack stats was always the way to go, but I did throw a few points into defense when it felt like things were getting a little too spicy on just the random encounters. Now, a few sentences ago, I did mention that you can adjust the difficulty, but it's not really done in the traditional sense. There's no like easy, normal, or hard mode, but instead, early on in the game, you're given access to relics, and those can be used for either just a little more clarity, maybe speed things up a bit, but they can also be used to just outright make the game ultra easy if you're just not good at it, or ultra hard if you are really good at it and want to get a little bit more mileage, or maybe get a little more frustrated on some of the more difficult bosses. Now, most of them are available quite early, but there aren't all of them right away. So realistically, unless you plan on going into New Game Plus, which is another pro, it does have that as a feature, then they do lose a little bit of that value as you'll have to progress a bit to get them, but not very far for most of them. And the game's length is also something that's very digestible. There's an obsession with really, really long, dense games, especially as of late, if you know what I'm talking about. This one's about 40 hours in length to 100% approximately. I did it without like looking things up for the most part. I maybe had a few people like point me in a direction or two towards the very end, and I clocked in at just about 38 hours, but I hadn't done all the achievements. There are some achievements like doing 10 bosses with the ultra hard relic on to make it so like I'll die in one hit if I don't perfect guard. And then on top of that, there's one to like cook every recipe. Like those are the only types of things I had left, and I was at about 38 hours. So if I went back and did those, yeah, I'd probably get a couple more hours on at max. So yeah, looking at that 40 hour for 100% completion, which for the low price of just about 35 USD, you're looking at a good time. It's even available for free on PlayStation Plus and Xbox Game Pass as of my recording of this video. So if you have those, then I would highly recommend picking it up. Now, I feel like with every RPG, there's always something that maybe doesn't vibe with people. Some of us are willing to look past that or aren't bothered by those little quirks and things. And Sea of Stars is not free of having its own little quirks that maybe people won't vibe with all that much. For example, the gear and stats are very simple. I don't mind this at all. I really care about the moment-to-moment gameplay and decision-making that comes with turn-based combat. But given some of the other RPGs on the market really touting customizability, which is not the word I was looking to use, but it's what we're going to go with, it's at least worth mentioning for those that were hoping for lots of customization. On top of that, things like learning the perfect attack or block timings can sometimes be a bit tough and even frustrating at times. And it's way more important to get good at those things than the game implies. The game tries to tell you, just think of it as a bonus. No, it's a huge difference between getting that perfect attack, especially on your very basic attacks, which are, to be fair, the easiest ones to land them on, and also getting those perfect guards against some of the opponents, because they hurt. Enemies in this game hurt a lot, and on top of that, you can completely lose the ability to properly break an attack with the locks, with hitting the weaknesses, if you don't get these perfectly timed attacks. So despite what the game says, I think it's a lot tougher than it is, or at least it's a lot more important than it is, and it can be tough at times. Another really small thing, and I don't really hold it much against it, but backtracking in the early game is a bit more tedious, I felt, than most games. While you can avoid fights, you can't flee from them if you do get into them, and some places are very far out of the way to get back to early on. I would normally recommend save some backtracking until much later on, but at that point, some items may not even be worth it anymore for anything but completion. A lot of them will be, because most of the items you backtrack for are actually items that are important at that point in the game, or will be important still at the end of the game. But I have to mention, because I'm sure you always think, I just got this new ability, let me go backtrack, and then it takes you forever. That's, again, worth mentioning. I'd say one actual criticism is character imbalance. Now, they try to make them all useful with those weakness locks and each of them having their own kind of unique thing that makes them stand out. You could see a combination, go, oh, I know exactly what combo of characters to use for that. But there's a couple of mid-game characters that really begin to outshine the rest thanks to one innate thing. They can delay enemy turns. I've gone through entire late game optional boss fights, which, by the way, there is a lot of optional content in this game. Another pro I probably should have mentioned earlier. But I've gone through some of those fights with them maybe getting 2 or 3 turns because I just kept delaying and delaying and delaying and delaying and then breaking the locks. And between all of that, they just never stood a chance. So I'd say that's an actual criticism, but it's not like I didn't have fun doing it. I love breaking RPGs, but I have to be fair and at least acknowledge this. Also, no voice acting. I don't consider this a con. Again, I grew up with this style of game, but you know, some people might, especially after, again, other RPGs that have come out in the last couple of years. That being said, overall, it was just a really fun game. It was actually really hard to stream because I was just kind of into it to the point where I didn't really care that much about my chat. I really just wanted to play the game. And that's kind of like the perfect endorsement of a game. You know, it's like, oh, I stream and I'm supposed to be entertaining. I don't care right now. I'll try occasionally, but right now I'm just kind of, you know, wrapped up in what they've got going on here. And I mean, what else could you ask for? And on top of that, the length of the game, for the cost of the game, for the quality of the game, not to mention you can also buy the art and soundtrack off of Steam, should you so desire. Highly recommend buying the soundtrack for what I think is like $10. It's just fantastic across the board. If you're someone who loves supporting indie RPGs, if you're someone who just loves turn-based RPGs as a whole, you definitely owe it to yourself to play this one. And if you haven't played the classics that I've mentioned, or some of the more recent ones that I've mentioned that inspire some of these aspects, then you might want to go back and visit those as well. I mean, Super Mario RPG is getting a remake in November, so that one won't be hard to revisit. Bravely and Octopath, you know, Octopath easy to revisit. Bravely, hopefully they make a little bit easier for the first 2 games in the series at some point. And Chrono Trigger is available on Steam. So those are like the most notable ones to me. And all the inspirations it pulls from, very obvious, very tongue-in-cheek. They do not try to hide that they're pulling from these style of games. Some of the references are beyond obvious, and you will notice them if you've played those games before. But that being said, they've also created something entirely their own. And that's what you love to see, is when you have your favorite mechanics in RPGs and you wonder why you never see another game do that. This is the game that does that and does it well. So overall, really impressed. I don't like to give a number grade, but I'll tell you this, it gets my recommendation if you can find the time, if you've got 40 hours to spare and want a retro-style turn-based RPG, this is the one I'd recommend picking up. But that's going to be a wrap for my thoughts on Sea of Stars. So, you know, let me know what you think in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, I bid you adieu. Bye-bye.